Hello humans, I'm Yoshiller, and welcome back to some more Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. In the previous part of this walkthrough, I completed the final collection of side quests within the game, and now that those are all done, I've opted to return to Lookout Landing in order to speak to a character who had previously assigned me one of these side quests. You all remember this little underground area here at Lookout Landing, and then there's a character in here who knows various things about characters and monsters and creatures and whatever throughout Hyrule. Well, in this part of the walkthrough, I'm going to fulfill another task for him. Not a side quest per se, but a major task that I have to do in order to get 100% completion. See, back in the prequel to this game, that being of course Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, there were three categories of large monsters, those being Stone Taluses, Hinoxes, and Moldugas, and there were a finite amount of each. The game keeps track of which ones you've defeated. As such, players that were able to slay and conquer all of them were rewarded with monster medals. Well, those same monster medals also exist within this game too, and though they may not actually do anything, they are still a collectible item that serve as proof for having completed a somewhat tedious task. Now, back in Breath of the Wild, you got these monster medals by visiting Kilton at his little shop. But since he's busy with other hobbies in Tarry Town, or however you pronounce it, here in Tears of the Kingdom, these medals are instead awarded by this NPC here in Lookout Landing. There are medals for each of the three categories of monsters that I just mentioned, and in this game, there are additional medals that are available for slaying and conquering all of the new categories of monsters that were introduced in Tears of the Kingdom. For the sake of this video, I'm going to go ahead and collect all of the monster medals that were previously accessible in Breath of the Wild, and then in the next video, I'll go ahead and collect all of the new monster medals. That means that, for the time being, I shall be hunting down and defeating every Stone Talus, Hinox, and Molduga in Hyrule, or essentially all of the monsters that previously existed in Breath of the Wild. And, if I'm not mistaken, there are actually more of each of these monsters here in this game as well. So I can talk to this dude and keep track of how many monsters I've defeated for each, but I'm just gonna go ahead and take it from the top and defeat all of them here in this video. And that means I've got quite the time-consuming task ahead of me, and I need to go ahead and do this so I can achieve 100% completion, so I'd better get started. Oh, and then for your convenience, I have timestamps of each of the categories of monsters in the description of this video. Back in Breath of the Wild, I did each of these monsters per video, but in this video, I'm doing 3 collections of monsters in this video. Just seems more convenient to do it that way. I figure we don't need 6 or 7 videos of me doing this exact same task. But alright, that's enough of an introduction. I'll go ahead and get the music queued up. Let's get into it. Whoosh! So that wound up taking a lot longer than I expected. It wound up taking a little over 5 hours. I guess it's not that bad. It's just I thought it would take maybe like 2 or 3 hours, but boy, was I wrong. And hey, if you ever wanted to know how long it would take to fight each of the larger monsters in Hyrule in one big swoop, that's just about how long it would take. Of course, that's assuming that you have quick access to the entirety of the map like I do, and that's assuming that you're as overpowered as I currently am, and that's partially why I decided that it'd be best to do this type of thing toward the end of the walkthrough. All this montage stuff is best saved for the end of the walkthrough for this very reason, but in any case, that's every monster slain at least once in each of the categories, and now that I've done so, I've returned to Lookout Landing so I can receive a monster medal! And full disclosure, I totally came back here earlier and was ready to record this portion of the video after thinking that I had defeated all the monsters, and then I completely forgot that these monsters also exist within the depths. So it took like 2 or 3 hours to do them all on the surface, and then another hour or two to do them all in the depths. That's my bad. I had to roll my eyes, rub my forehead, and then go, okay, and then I tacked on another 2 hours of work. But in the process, I learned that it's actually optimal to alternate between Stone Taluses and Hinoxes rather than eradicating one specific species of monster at a time. See, the Hinoxes give you the weapons that you need to defeat each of the monsters, and then the Stone Taluses give you the items that you need to fuse to the weapons so that you can make them super powerful. So it's best to kind of alternate between them. And then there are the Moldugas, and you can kind of do them whenever. Moldugas are easy, there's only 4 of them, none of them are in the depths, they're all on the surface. I guess they take the longest to defeat out of any of them, but otherwise it's not that bad. And actually, that's why I got the Molduga medal first, by accident. I came up here to try and get all 3 medals at the same time, and I only got the Molduga's medal at first because none of them are in the depths, so that's the easiest one. But otherwise, I now have all 3 medals. These medals have existed since Breath of the Wild, and in the next part of this walkthrough, I'll go ahead and click the 3 new medals that were added here in Tears of the Kingdom for the new species of monsters. But otherwise, that wraps up this part of my walkthrough, and I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in future videos as I reach the end of this grand game. But for now, bye-bye, humans! Whoosh! And so, we've reached the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please click on the like button or leave a comment. Either of those actions would really help me out. If you wish to see more of my gameplay content, please click the subscribe button so that you can be notified each time I post a new video. And if you click on the bell icon, you can customize how often you receive notifications. Thank you so much for watching my video all the way to the end, and I hope to see you around in the future. Bye-bye, humans! Whoosh!